The Bad Guys Breaking In was released not too long ago, and I want to talk about it. DreamWorks has a long and storied history of milking their franchises for all they're worth. In fact, of the big animated studios, I think they might be the OG of this mindset, being the first of the studios to really go back to the well for big box office returns in the 2000s. Disney and Pixar had both done cinematic sequels at least once by that point, but at the same time, they were mostly focusing on original content. Meanwhile, DreamWorks thought, screw it, sequels, and it proved to be very lucrative and turned them into a top dog during the 2000s and even for a time during the 2010s. Although by that point they were also being surpassed by Disney, Pixar, and Illumination. However, this heavy emphasis on long-running franchises was never limited to simply films, but also involved a lot of really good shows. In particular, my favourites are probably the DreamWorks Dragon Saga, or at least the ones that star Hiccup and the gang. That being said, over time it's become clear that DreamWorks is very much a pale shadow of what they once were, and the 2020s have seen them fall into relative obscurity, at least compared to their golden era of the past. It's not even that their films are terrible compared to what they were, it's just they don't get much traction these days on anything other than their big franchises, and even then it's not the same. In this current era, when a big name's released, it grosses into the billions or close to it, but DreamWorks' biggest successes in that department during the 2020s, they haven't really come close to those sorts of numbers. For example, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, which is the first major piece of Shrek content that had been released in over a decade, only managed to make $484 million at the box office, which isn't bad, don't get me wrong, considering it's much higher than most other films of this decade. I just think they probably would have hoped for a bit more for the return of their marquee franchise, even in spin-off form. After all, it made less money than the original film, which came out much closer to the studio's peak time. Then there's Kung Fu Panda 4, which actually did well for itself and outgrossed the third installment, which came out during the decline period of the 2010s, but it still wasn't a really big breakout movie that returned them to their former glory either. That being said, just because they're struggling in terms of viewers doesn't mean it's all bad. They're still making a lot of quality films that firmly fall into the underrated territory. One such franchise is The Bad Guys, with the first film coming out in 2022 and the sequel coming out earlier this year. And like I said, whilst they are really good films, they haven't really been able to break through financially, which is a shame because it feels like they're not being rewarded for good work. However, that's not the only quality piece of Bad Guys content that has been released this year, as like I said, The Bad Guys Breaking In released not too long ago, and I really enjoyed it. It wasn't just serviceable or only okay, it's a legitimately fun and exciting prequel show, and it draws you in with funny and heartfelt storytelling. I really think that it avoided the flaws the previous specials had in a lot of ways, and honestly benefited a lot from long-form storytelling because it allowed them to have crazy, self-contained episodes that also slowly told a story of the gang rising up from absolute nobodies to becoming a force to be reckoned with in the world of crime. In the specials, you don't have the time and the variety of situations to flesh out the characters in different ways because they're in that same story and same heist for so long, so they don't progress. It probably also doesn't help the writing for those specials was mostly bad overall, or at the very least, simply doesn't compare to the writing here, which was extremely engaging with lots of character development and humor peppered in. That's a big thing for me. The show is actually really damn funny. There are so many good jokes and moments and a really big variety of humor. If you want toilet humor, they have it here, but honestly, they lean on it way less than they do in the movies, where it feels as if piranhas farting every 5 seconds. If you want some pretty harrowing cringe humor where the bad guys make absolute fools of themselves and end up humiliated, they have it in spades. If you want witty one-liners and quips, they have it here. And if you want absurdity where the characters and the situations they find themselves in are completely insane, well, they have that too. Another big improvement for me is the voice acting. The reality is that voice acting in the movies is top tier, and they got some really big names for it. If nothing else, DreamWorks can still get the names for their movies. I just wish that they could draw a bit of a crowd to come and see them, although, are there people still who could draw a big crowd on voice alone? I don't know, but let's not get too sidetracked. The voice acting in the first movie was really amazing, and so when it came time to watch the specials, it just didn't compare at all. I mean, the reality is that they were not likely to splurge on getting the actors back for the shows, although it's not like it's never happened before either. The DreamWorks Dragon shows got both the actors for Hiccup and Astrid, although I can't quite recall if they got the other names. Plus, Jack Black came back and did a Kung Fu Panda show a couple of years ago called Kung Fu Panda the Dragon Knight, which ran for 3 seasons. Although I think that was the first time he'd lent his voice to one of the many Kung Fu Panda shows that had been made across the years. So whilst it wasn't an impossibility for some of the cast to be brought back, I think it wasn't in the cards for a film that didn't gross over $300 million and whose specials wouldn't likely gain all that much traction as a result. In the specials, I don't know what it was, but I just wasn't feeling it for the most part. Maybe it was just me comparing too hard to the movies and that set me against them from the beginning, or maybe they just needed time to gel with the characters more. Hell, maybe they just needed a better script. Whatever it was, this time around in Breaking In, they felt like they fit the characters far more, and they put out really great performances, which for me was doubly impressive considering I've recently seen The Bad Guys 2, and thus I had those performances more fresh in my mind, as opposed to the specials where it felt like it had been a much longer gap between that and the movie. We'll also just stick with an audio theme for a second to acknowledge that the score for the show was really good too. I do love a good heist theme, and Breaking In plays a lot into those classic heist and crime movie soundtracks, and thus enhances the overall storytelling and feel of the show. That's something I've noticed. It feels like they know what they want the show to be in this, as opposed to before, where it felt like they were just held back by holiday theming and were throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks. On top of all of that, I think visually the show looked a lot better than the specials did. Now don't get me wrong, it's not like the show's a visual feast in the same way as the films. It would never be able to scale those truly lofty heights simply because they don't have the budget for it. Each of the films cost around $80 million to make, which is pretty low for a big name animated studio in this day and age where inflated and ballooned budgets are the norm, but I guess this is how DreamWorks has managed to stay in business during their decline era, whilst other studios might have gone under. Regardless of how much they spend on their movies though, it's a certainty that they spend far, far less on the shows, and you can really tell. That being said, for what the show is, I think the animation's really good. At no point did I watch it and think, oh, this looks ugly or bad or cheap. On top of that, the action's really good as well, and whilst once again they won't be able to replicate what they were doing in the film simply because of lack of budget, they were able to make a really visually compelling season. Of course though, even if those things were negatives, if the show was ugly and had really terrible animation, it wouldn't be the end of the world. I've watched plenty of ugly films and TV shows, and yet there were other merits that pulled it over the line. I think the definitive example of all time has got to be Hoodwinked from the mid-2000s, which has animation so cheap and terrible, I'm surprised they were able to sell any tickets to go and see it at all. For reference, it made over $100 million somehow. I really like that film, and thus I can safely say that bad visuals will not hold back my enjoyment. Even if the music was bad and the voice acting mid at best, I'd be able to look past it and enjoy it for what it is, so long as the story's good. For me, that's the most important thing. I can look past the classic trappings of a cheaply made piece of media, so long as they have a script that is enjoyable and compelling. A story you can buy into. If you can't do that, then people are going to come away from it pissed no matter how good it looked or sounded. An animation lives and dies by the narrative, and that's been the status quo since they moved from being an attraction in and of itself due to the novelty of it all, and they became much more commonplace. Thankfully, this story is just really good. Split into 9 episodes, The Bad Guys Breaking In tells a compelling story from start to finish. Maybe it doesn't play completely nicely with the story of The Bad Guys 2, specifically the prologue, where the implication is that Webbs is new to the team, and the rest of the bad guys are seasoned and have worked together for a long time. However, this version introduces them with her as a new member of the team, sure, but with all of them still being massive rookies and complete nobodies in the criminal underworld. She joins, but they're all at the same skill level and work together to grow as a team, whilst in the film she seemingly showcases a lot of her abilities for the first time on that heist, which doesn't really make all that much sense, considering a lot of the impressive feats she showcases in the show itself. However, even then it's only a minor thing, and to be honest, DreamWorks shows play rather fast and loose with canon anyway, and often have storylines and character beats that don't make sense in the grand scheme of the film's overall story. It's still a whole lot of fun though, and so I don't really care all that much. I realize though that I am being a bit hypocritical, because if I didn't like the show as much as I did already, I'd probably tear it to ribbons for this type of thing. I certainly have for shows in the past, like the first season of Kung Fu Panda the Dragon Knight. Since the story wasn't as good, I didn't have grace on the continuity issues. Is that fair? No, but at the same time, I don't really care. Okay, so this brings us to the story proper, and what I really liked about episode 1, Bad Beginnings, was that it drops you in not at the start of the journey. The story doesn't really get bogged down in explaining how the characters met or their backstories or anything like that. You quite literally get dropped into the story midway through a heist and you figure it out from there. It's actually a really good episode because it showcases each member of the team in depth, which is not easy to do in 21 minutes. There's a really intense opening heist where it's clear that they're new at this and working it as a team, but they're still getting their name out there. They have a huge epic action sequence where they're in this big chase with the cops, only for them to get brought back right down to earth when they drive on past them, and it's revealed that the cops are looking for somebody else instead. So here the story is that they're nobodies in the industry, and the police could not care less about them. Their goal is to make it to the top 10 of the worst list, and so they set out to steal a priceless painting. There's a big build up again, and in the end they fail to steal it, but they do get their name out there slightly and become closer as a team as a result. That's one of the really big things I loved about the show. It doesn't go 0 to 100 just like that. You see across the course of the episodes that they work their way up from the bottom rung, and they don't always succeed. It's a slow burn storyline, or at least as much of a slow burn as it can be for a season that only goes for 9 episodes, although I expect that based on the ending of the season, there is going to be a continuation of some sort, or at least I hope so, because like I said, it was really good. Another thing I really liked was the episodes don't focus solely on Wolf or Snake, who in the movies really do feel like the main bad guys, especially Wolf, who takes even more focus in the second film, while Snake becomes more comic relief with his vinyasa and the overtop relationship with Doom the Raven. However, that's not the case in the show, where it feels it lives up to the name The Bad Guys. It's not Wolf and the bad guys, but simply the bad guys, and everybody in the crew gets their own episode in the spotlight. For instance, the first episode of the season heavily features Wolf and Snake, and whilst obviously the other characters are in there too, they're more secondary secondary characters there to have some action moments or be involved with a joke. Episode 2 though, which involves the gang's plot to steal the secret recipes of a famous confectioner and accidentally stumbling across her evil conspiracy to sell mind control candy and by doing so take over the world, is an episode that features Tarantula and Shark in the bigger roles. Piranha's then the next level down, and then Wolf and Snake are far more minor. This episode is absurd in all the best of ways, and culminates with them accidentally destroying her factory and thus making it onto the bottom rung of the worst list. But remember what I said about slow burn? Episode 3 takes it to whole new levels as the bad guys get a very sad reality check where they realize that despite being number 10 on the worst of the worst list, they're still nobodies to the vast majority of people in the world, and thus Wolf has to convince local news reporter Tiffany Fluffett to do an interview on them, but of course, it goes terribly, they're humiliated in a long sequence filled up with some premium cringe. Thus, they have to think of something new to showcase their skill set, and this is to steal a giant hot dog and be filmed doing it by Tiffany. This culminates in one of the funniest sequences in the season, where they accidentally get their jetpack stuck on a hot dog, which in turn turns it into a rocket that chases them through the city. When it stops to hide their crime and complete the heist, they eat this gargantuan sausage, and by doing so, they begin to earn more credibility. They have the respect and fear of the local populace, which is proof of their success. Episodes 4 and 5 are probably some of my favourites of the season, although I really love all the episodes, so perhaps that's not the highest praise. Anyway, episodes 4 and 5 take a bit more of a step back to let the story breathe, and add a bit more variety into the narrative. They don't just go heist across every single episode. The format changes up just like the characters being focused on, while still pushing forward either the team progression, which is the main storyline, or the individual characters and their place within the team. Episode 4 sees Piranha get fed up with how filthy their hideout is, and so he takes a stand and forces them all to do chores. Whilst Wolf goes to deal with the septic tank outside, and so is out of the episode aside from some toilet humor cutaways, this episode showcases building the teamwork of Shark, Piranha, and Tarantula as they go toe-to-toe with Snake in a battle of thieves to try to get out of doing chores. Meanwhile, episode 5 is Tarantula focused and deals with her trying to prove herself to the team because she overheard Snake and Wolf talking about her and she thinks they want to kick her off the team. It turns out she misheard, but regardless, she decides the only thing for it is to hire some washed old escape artist to teach them, but he quickly reveals himself as a scammer. Although hilariously, it takes them over a week to figure that out, and he very rapidly puts them all out of commission and turns them into the cops. All except for Tarantula, that is, who manages to get him to reform, help her free her friends, giving her a big hero moment to show the gang why they need her, only for it to be revealed at the end that they never wanted to get rid of her and they think she's a great asset to the team. Episode 6 takes a step into the weird side of things when the crew heists a lab and Snake falls into a vat of anti-aging serum, and thus everybody except for Wolf thinks it's the perfect time for Snake to get adopted by a rich billionaire and then steal from him in the night. Wolf, though, speaking from experience, says it's too risky because he can get too greedy and get lost in the role, which happened to him. And indeed it does happen to Snake, who realizes that he's in line to inherit trillions in stocks and bonds and decides the best play is to wait for decades for this guy to die so he can cash in. Of course, this is an absolutely insane plan, and it gets even more insane when Wolf, the last bad guy standing after Snake locked the rest of them in a secret vault to stop them interfering, arrives and introduces himself as the billionaire's secret long-lost son. Then the serum wears off and they get chased off the property with a sword. This is probably the most filler of the episodes, but it's also one of the most fun and absurd, so it doesn't really matter in that way. However, even with all that absurdity, they were able to pepper in some backstory for Wolf and plant the seeds for the introduction of his mentor, who's referenced again during the course of the season, and who makes a brief appearance at the end, likely to set up a second season with that character either as an ally or a villain. From here, we dive back into the story progression, but they don't let up on the insanity. Heist on the Run sees the gang steal a gemstone from a prominent criminal group, the Night Owls, with Wolf bragging about it on social media before they get back to their lair, and with the Show My Location turned on. Thus, they can be tracked by pretty much every criminal in the city. Hijinks then ensue where Snake and Tarantula try to fix the car, which is broken down, but in actuality, has only run out of fuel. Meanwhile, Shark and Wolf had to dodge the Night Owls, a swarm of killer bee criminals, and then end up at the mercy of a dangerous gang of dude bro goats, who steal their gemstone and force them to drive an electric scooter they'd stolen up a ramp, off a jump, and through a ring of fire. They're saved by the timely intervention of Tarantula and Snake, who had actually come to attack them because whilst fixing the car, they went insane and started to think that the others had betrayed them. Oh, and Piranha also develops Stockholm Syndrome multiple times and keeps joining rival gangs that kidnap them. This episode was a perfect story builder that pushed forward the plot of the bad guys rising through the ranks and sees them climbing higher yet again, but keeps it feeling fresh with this absolutely batshit insane storyline, and also creates such a deep contrast between this and the next episode, which is a deep dive into Snake's backstory. Here we learn how he was an only child of master criminal Serpentina, with his mother not approving of him being part of a group and thinking that only solo criminals matter or can be legends. This episode starts the slow slow things down and reaffirms the bonds between the characters. It also serves as a really fun action showcase as well as a bit of a puzzle because it lets you try to think about how they might overcome each trap and what the solutions could be as they fail again and again and again. They steal back Snake's childhood ball, working together as a true team, and solidify themselves as actual master criminals right before the finale, which involves them in a race against the clock to find a huge stash of gold that Wolf believes his mentor left him in his will. However, to find it, they need to act as a team and complete more heists in a single night than anybody has ever been able to do before. Along the way, their hideout blows up, and yet their team endures, and they end with the discovery of a new base, which is the one that they have throughout the films and the specials. The finale in particular was actually really gripping with high stakes, drama, and epic action. Seriously, I cannot overstate just how awesome this show was to me. It had everything I could have wanted from a bad guy show, and actually got me really excited for the future of the franchise as a whole. Normally for a modern DreamWorks show, I'm going to walk away from it not really caring about season 2, but here, I'm invested, and I need to see where the story's going to go from here. I actually think this show got me to care about the non-Wolf and Snake bad guys more than the movies did, so there's that. DreamWorks usually releases seasons of shows in batches in quick succession, so we probably won't be waiting too long for season 2, but still, I want it now, damn it! With all that being said though, these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the bad guys breaking in, if you've seen it? Did you like it? Hate it? If you haven't seen it, have I convinced you to give it a go? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.